are listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Don't forget to log on www.rainieravenue Radio.world.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. It's me, your host, Tony B. This is Friday, and that means it is our special broadcast of the impacts of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. If you're just tuning in, we'll be talking to William White, founder of My Brother's Teacher. Earlier, we had the opportunity to talk to Ryan Preco, the Director of Policy and Advocacy for Childcare, and talk about how the childcare industry is impacted, which led us into a conversation about early education. Then we also had an opportunity to talk to Joseph Sal, Executive Director of the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, and this effort to disaggregate the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community away from what's called API because of the specific needs that these communities faces. We're going a little bit into the historic nature of why that was in place, but the pandemic has made it clear that members of the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community are being impacted way differently by the coronavirus and everything that it's bringing with it. Just joining me was Gordon McHenry, the President and CEO of United Way of King County. And yes, I've been telling you about this. This effort is to encourage young black males to become interested in being early education teachers. Joining me is Mr. William White. How are you, William?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Good. Under the circumstances, fantastic. I'm going to share a little bit about your background. You're from Fredericksburg, fourth-year doctoral candidate in early childhood special education at the University of Washington. Say that again. The fourth-year doctoral candidate in early childhood special education at the University of Washington. And I'm talking to a black male. You received your BA in political science, pre-law. Early childhood special education. What made you decide to go into this particular area?
You know, a lot of that comes from my experience of being around my mother in the early years as a teacher. And so I was always around education, and I really love what I did. I was passionate about it. I love working with the kids. And I'm like, I really love this type of career. But starting off, so it was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I think I want to be a lawyer. I got to spear off, because you think of that complex of seeing your parents, struggle with the money that, teachers make. But then when you really look at what's in front of you and you're like, it's not about the money, it's about the impact. And I started seeing the impact I was making on young minds. And that blossomed into understanding that was really my driven and my purpose to get into early childhood education.
And from your perspective, and we know now that, again, we have a lot of research-based evidence we talked about earlier, and we have a lot of information. But for anybody who's tuning in, who's listening, who says, okay, what does that mean? Is that daycare? Early childhood special education. Define for us what that means.
So early childhood education is when you look at pre-K to third graders to the third grade. So looking at to about 8 years old. And it really varies by many states as well, how they define it. But in terms of how early childhood education is defined nationally, is pre-K to third grade.
And for you, what does that education look like when you're talking about early childhood education? What does that mean? What is to be taught? What is to be learned? What is to be shared about this experience?
I think we need to really look at the explorative ways of how children actually interact, right? So one thing that we really need to focus on is social emotional learning. And that's very, very important. That's a lot more important than learning your ABCs, your 1, 2, 3s. First is, how do you regulate your own emotions, and how do you work with other people around you? And, as we are in the work world as grown adults, we look at how our colleagues interact. We're like, oh, were you in that when you're in pre-K or early child? Did you get that social emotional awareness? And it's very important for us as Black people to make our children more aware of their social emotional development as young Black and brown children, just knowing the context of the environment we currently are living in, right? So it's really important when I look at early childhood education, I'm first looking at that social emotional impact, and then I'm kind of going from there and looking at cognitively, how can I help you be the best you, right? Because every child learns different.
All right. And you started a program, My Brother's Teacher, which is actually kicking off today. Is that right?
Yes, at 12:06 a.m. Eastern time. We have 1,200 views of the video so far, 45 shares, 200 likes. Like it kicked off in a great manner of a lot of support. And I appreciate those who have shared that.
And rolling it out today. Tell us about My Brother's Teacher.
So My Brother's Teacher is an idea that was actually happening on two parts of Seattle. So I was early working on a program called Beyond the Tassel, as I saw there was a need for more Black and brown males in early childhood education. And I was doing all this research in the lab, as I called it, and looking at the whiteboard. I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to do research, but there's not a lot of Black and brown males in the immediate area to even speak to about their experiences. So I went to the board and started drawing and doing the research. But then I started looking at some of the really important parts of how do you build a grow your own program. And many grow your own programs that, do not really make it is because of funding, right? Funding is a key aspect. And also, which is really crazy, the barriers that are actually inhibiting many grow your own programs to fruition. So such as there was a grow your own program in another state that was doing great work, bringing tons of men of color into the field of education in general. But then the state decided to change how these Black and brown males could actually get into education by creating additional barriers. So when I saw all those barriers and I was like, I need some more work to do on myself, and I need to look more at what's going on in the field. And that led me to Dr. Gil Joseph at Cultivate Learning and Dr. Monica at Early Childhood Education in the city of Seattle, who was working with the Levy Fund, who provided money, who was earmarked for My Brother's Teacher. And we collaboratively came together and took all these ideas and said, okay, this is a really tight program, right? This is what we really need to take. But one of the key pieces that was important to us was actually going into the community and getting those voices. Like, what do you see on this program? What do you want, right? And then pitching that to other young Black and brown males. So I spoke to young Black and brown males on the campus in different programs. I spoke to them on the basketball court. I spoke to them just on the train. Like, what would you do about it? Because I think in a lot of times the research, we see the research done, but we never see the research come back to the community, right? So in this aspect, I wanted to bring the research and the community together and say, how can we partner to make the biggest impact for everybody?
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the outcomes that led you to say, okay, this is something I've done some research that I need to do. I've done some research. I've done some due diligence. This is why I need to do this.
Honestly, looking at the field of education, that's over 80% white females, and it's only 2% Black males, right? So let's just sit on that for a second. 80% of teachers are white women who are in front of many of our Black and brown babies. That to me is a state of emergency that we need to increase the field of teacher diversity. And being a special educator, many people say, how did you switch from, looking at special education and inclusion? I said, I never did that. What I did is I intentional about who are the teachers that I help create. I want them to kind of go into special education, because that will then what? We know the research says that they're less likely to define our Black and brown babies as special educated. So having that label, and that's important. That's critical, right? So when I saw this work, I said, this is a state of emergency. If there's no time like today, this is the time we need to do that work. So working along, Cultivate Learning, working along Seattle Public Schools, and having been funded by Stranahan Foundation and the Levy Fund, I was like, this time to go, and bringing all those voices together and looking at the outcomes that, Black and brown males, many of them say they don't go into early child education because they didn't have a great experience in school while they were there in elementary school. So they said, why would I come back to the classroom? And that was many things I heard. I was like, but let's give it a try. And there's like, well, I'll be willing if I had some guidance, or if I had a little bit of funding, or if I had just somebody to push me. And I said, well, I can give you that guidance. I can give you that push. I can help find some funding. So when we looked at what was key important to increasing Black and brown males, and we looked in the community of what is really needed, we said, okay, this is what we're going to start with. Let's pilot this right now and see what happens.
And My Brother's Teacher, Share with us your goals and how you see this working. And really, now that you're rolling out, what boots on the ground are going to look like, if that's what is happening right now with this rollout.
Yeah, so our two main goals is to diversify the early learning workforce in Seattle and also to support post-secondary opportunities in the field of education for males of color in Seattle, right? So we know that the Seattle Promise is something that is available to all children who attend Seattle public schools and graduate. But sometimes after you go in that, there's not a lot of guidance and how can we push these students like, hey, these are opportunities, not just go get an associate's degree, but we want to be intent on like, this is what you can do, and we're going to help guide you through that path. And so looking at rolling this program out now, there are several phases to this project. So in phase one, which is what we're kind of working with now, we're recruiting. We're able and we're in the community. We're going to be doing some webinars coming up. We're definitely during the winter break to try to get more people involved to see what's going on. But in phase one, we're really putting it to where they'll actually be able to take college coursework while still in high school. Where many students, if you look at a lot of things and you talk to them, they don't ever have that opportunity while in high school to take college work because there's too many barriers inhibiting them that accessibility to that. So that was some of the barriers that we had to knock down beforehand before even getting to this point of launch. So knowing that they'll be able to complete those college courses beforehand, leaving with 10 college credits, they'll also be doing internships in the community. So working with young children. So looking at this multi-generational approach that they'll be getting mentored, and then they'll also be mentoring young Black and brown children is expansive, right? It's just incredible. So just that touch is really important.
And are you working with different groups? Are you partnering with different entities? Are you connected with folks who are working with the target that you're looking for?
Yeah, so currently with Seattle Public Schools, I'm working with Kendrick Wilson, who is the director of Academy for Rising Educators, which is another program that looks to diversify education. So we've been working collaboratively together on like, how can we work and how can we do this work well? So when we look at the mentorship component, and I want to spend a little bit on that because I think that is the key to this program being not only successful, but these males actually seeing what's going on. I decided in this approach to mentorship, it's important that we bring in those people in the community. So I partnered with the Zeta Phi Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and also I partnered with the Zeta Upsilon chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I brought them together, and some said, "Whoa, two fraternities." I said, "Right," because I want these young men to see that we are working together in the community. We have one just cause, and we're here because we want to make sure that you get to the best place in your life, and we want to help you get there. And then thinking about my workshop component that will be ongoing while they're in the program, we're reaching out to different scholars across the country, right? Different practitioners. You don't need to just do research to be an impact, right? I was a teacher and I made an impact. So we're reaching out to those teachers across the country, say, hey, you want to just step in and speak to them because we want them to see who they could be in the future, right? Outside of Seattle, looking at the areas such as Washington, D.C., where I used to teach, looking at areas in Texas, looking at Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, New York, because we want them to get this multi-dimensional approach to, oh, I can go to different places and really see how education works and what they hear, because it may be somebody in Tuscaloosa that can connect to one of our fellows, but they may not connect to the person we bring in from Florida. So understanding it's more than me to this project. It's basically a big approach to saying, hey, we all need to make this impact. We all need to be doing this work. And we first need to start with setting an example right here in Seattle.
Talk a little bit more about how the program works. You mentioned the membership component, but again, how you take young Black males and then guide them into even understanding the role of being a teacher in early education, and then navigating the system, which they're not going to see a lot of people who look like them through this process.
That's a great question. So looking at early child education, how do we break it down? That's a big part of our workshop component, right? So we're really going to spend that time of saying, what does it mean to be a teacher? But I first want to say, what does it mean to be you? One of our first components of our workshops is looking at who are you? How do you view yourself? And then how would you want others to view you? And then how do you want students to view you? And how do you see your impact being with the students that you're working with, right? So through our workshop component of early education, and by them completing coursework in early childhood education, they're going to see from early childhood education from 3 different lenses of like, oh, this is, oh, I see it here. Oh, this is another example. But the biggest component is that practice piece, right? Because so many times we say, oh, you need to read this chapter 3 through 5, or read pages 50 to 35 and come back tomorrow. No, it's about how do you really practice this? So looking at our internship component that's going to come up next summer, where they're actually going to be working beside these kids, and they're going to actually see a mentorship of, okay, I can have a mentor from North Seattle College who's also working with me, and they're a male of color in the field of early child education, and they just finished their degree. Oh, I'm practicing. So they're getting coached alongside by these men of color who are already in the field, alongside myself, who was observing and stepping in, because I don't want to just be seen as Williams, the director. I'm the one to get in there and get my hands dirty, like, hey, this is what we have to do. But to your second point of navigating, that's so true, right? We know the foundations of education was built off of white supremacy, right? So we're going through an education system that was never built for us and never thought that we can actually get to where we are. So in the very beginning, you said, William, you're like a black male getting his PhD, and it's very true. It's not that many in the University of Washington, but we're looking at like, how can we bring more in? But when we not just bring them in, how can we support them? And so I looked at that, how do I deliver that message to the students that are actually going to be in this program? So having these real conversations with them about what is critical race theory, right? What is racism? When have you actually been approached? Looking at, have you had interaction with the police officers? What did that look like? How did that impact you? Have you had a teacher that was problematic to you? How did that conversation go? How did you feel emotional, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure they're fully prepared. And another component of the project that I speak on is the mental health. Having been in the field for 10 years, there's a lot of things that Black men go through as a teacher because you're always looked at through a different lens, right? So you're always under the lens of like, oh, there's a teacher observation. How am I going to be viewed? I'm working with a student, I'm using his voice, but then they're like, you're yelling at the student. I'm like, this is my regular voice. Mr. White, you said this. I didn't mean anything. No, but you're wrong. So thinking about the mental health component that goes into this project, we want to make sure they're mentally sound, right? So we're also bringing in that therapist to have these conversations with us in group therapy. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. We can talk to somebody about what's going on in the community. And what's also important that I'll bring up is in the research I'm currently doing, looking at the lived experiences of Black male teachers that just came out recently, is Black males actually really look and really worry about their children that come in the classroom that may have less than. So that Black male teacher is the one saying, hey, okay, look, here's a bag of deodorant, some soap, here's some shirts, here's some shoes. Oh, here's a meal. I want to feed you, right? And so many people say, oh, you don't do that. No, that's what they're doing. That's what's coming out of my research, that we're compassionate, right? So thinking about that masculinity part, many times Black males who go into the field are always viewed as they're being toxic masculinity when they're really just being their authentic selves. So many times we need to understand that at the end of the day, what is the really driving factor for a Black male to be in the classroom? And you'll see throughout is that they want to make an impact in the community they left and where they're going.
My guest again is William White, founder of My Brother's Teacher. William, while you're doing this, while you're rolling this out, we are in the midst of a crisis, maybe not seen by this country health-wise in decades. We've talked and we've discussed how this is impacting communities, in particular, exacerbated in Black communities and, again, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities, in communities of color. For you, how has the pandemic impacted and affected your thoughts about the program and your thoughts in general about the need for Black males in this particular field? And folks really don't have the opportunity to spend time together, to be face-to-face. This is learning going online. How are you addressing these issues, or are they even issues to you?
No, it's a huge issue. Like I go back to it's a state of emergency. You know, waking up as a Black male and seeing that somebody else is killed in the street, that impacts me. You know, personally, I take a walk every day and I was followed by police for over several blocks. I thought I was going to lose my life. I literally did. But I was more worried about that 13-year-old that didn't know how to stop and react the way I did. I was thinking about what is another Black male on the other side of the county and he's running, where I decided to just walk slowly, right? So that impacted me to a point that, oh, this is something necessary. We need to get in front of these Black and brown males and help cultivate them to be the best males they can be. So looking at the pandemic we're currently going through, it's hard, right? Being a Black male in a program, a PhD program, and having certain milestones that you must finish in the amount of certain time, but you can't leave your house, it's hard. It affects your mental health, right? So knowing that all these things is a 36-year-old black male is going through, imagine how a 12-year-old is going through, a black male who has to sit in front of a computer every day for sometimes 7 to 8 hours a day. How is he mentally? Are we checking in on that? So thinking about the program and the impact we're making, we know that we have to look at different ways of how can we reach the youth, but we're doing that. We're thinking about on the grounds of while I work with the different fraternities, as I go to the table with different members in my cabinet, we think about how can we still reach these black males, even in the middle of a pandemic? And how can we do that safely?
And I'm just going to ask this question in the way that it is asked. If you've not listened to the show, we just have open, honest, frank conversation. What 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 gives you the audacity to think that you can convince high school young black males to think that they should take an interest in early education as a career choice, knowing that it really, the pay is not the best. Again, the hours are long, and what makes you feel like that you can do this?
When you know what your purpose is and you walk in it, you fear nothing. So knowing that my purpose is to create and help cultivate the next generation of black and brown male teachers and diversify the early childhood workforce, I know that in working in my purpose, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm meant to do. And those who choose to walk into this program are walking into their purpose. Sometimes in May they come into the program looking for one thing. They're like, well, I figured out this other thing to do. But they came in front of us and they held that time. So thinking about having the audacity to step in a place, in a state, in a city that I'm not from, but I'm trying to become a part of the community, understanding what's going on, no matter what the age is, it's important that we look and give them the trajectory to be successful. So by laying out the framework of where they're beginning as certain young black males and where they can go as finishing with a master's degree, where they can make upwards of $70,000 to $80,000 as a teacher with the summers off, I should say, with the summers off, that's what we need to do. And look at that, right? Because so many times we look at what the money is. So that's an attractive factor. Because so many times people go into schools and they sell programs and say, well, if you do this, teacher, you won't get paid much. That's a lie. You can make money in the field of early child education. But I go back to my story. I didn't go into this for the money. I didn't get a master's degree for the money. I became a teacher because of the impact I make. So those who come into this program that find me coming in like, why would you do this? I'm looking for those who want to take part and believe that they can be the next generational leaders and take my role right now and keep this moving in Seattle.
My guest again is William White, founder of My Brother's Teacher. Rolled out today. What, 12 o'clock at night on the East Coast? And, rolling out today. And excited to have you here, man, and give you the platform to share the work that you were doing. Just got a couple minutes left, but I want to give you the opportunity for final words here to share what you'd like to share with our audience.
Thank you. If you're out there in the listening world, I first want to say thank you to Rainier Radio for giving me the opportunity to come here today. But I want to encourage you to please check out our website. Please check out what we've built and created for young black and brown males to enter into this field. Knowing that we're going to provide them with a tremendous amount of support outside of mentorship, but you're going to have college credits, right? And they say, why is that important to start college early? Because many times students don't finish college because they never had an opportunity to prepare and how to get ready for college. So having that experience of having a black male teach you two of your first college courses is impactful to help that driving force. Understanding that we're going to provide additional stipends for your work. We're giving fellowships, so $1,200 fellowships over the summertime for you to actually be in the field, because we know money is a barrier. We have to be honest, but we want to pay you for your time. Understanding that the advisement, understanding that the other stuff that's going to come along with this package that's on the website is what we're here to do. And I want you to know I'm coming authentically, and I'm from Virginia, but I'm now here in Seattle, Washington. I'll be here for a little bit. But my whole goal is diversifying Seattle. And as a work aside Kendrick at Seattle Public Schools, that's what we're doing. So even if you're a grown adult and you're looking for opportunities and you might be a male of color or you may be a person of color that's interested in teaching, please reach out to us, because we can find a path with you and help fund that opportunity to diversify this workforce, because that is our goal and that's what we strive to do. Thank you so much.
And how do folks get in touch with you?
So you can reach me at mbtsea@uw.edu. Our website is cultivatelearning.uw.edu/MBT/. Or if you just search on the web for My Brother's Teacher, Cultivate Learning, it'll pop up. please reach out to us. We're interested in hearing from you.
Okay, I heard backslash and a couple other things, and then so I'm gonna give people a second here while I stall for time in case they need to break out the phone and put a letter text to themselves or get a pen and a paper so they can write this information down. Now, okay, now that they're ready, give them this information one more again.
All right, one more time. So the website, cultivatelearning.uw.edu/MBT/ our email address, mbtsea@uw.edu. And if you just go into your Google search and put My Brother's Teacher, Cultivate Learning, our website will pop up, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Please reach out to us.
All right, well, congratulations on your rollout, and much success to you, Mr. White.
Thank you, sir.
And that's it. That's going to do it for the kid. That's all the time that I have. I'd like to thank my guests joining me earlier. Again, from Childcare Aware, Director of Policy and Advocacy, Ryan Preco, the Executive Director for the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, Joseph Sayal, and CEO and President of the United Way of King County, and also a South Seattle resident, Gordon McHenry Jr., and just joining us, the founder of My Brother's Teacher, rolled out today. Hopefully you wrote all that information down so that you can get in touch with him if you're interested, Mr. William White. And so we'll be back with you next Friday for more impacts of the coronavirus on South Seattle and surrounding communities. It's me, Tony B., your host, right here on Rainier Avenue Radio, saying, remember, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you are probably right. I'm out. Peace.